My name is David Richards. Everyone calls me Grom. And I am a ski patroller at heart at Alta, Utah, Alta Ski Resort. And I'm now the director of the Avalanche program for Alta Ski Area. Every rescuer, whether it be the layman on a casual ski tour or a professional rescuer, needs to know that there is a probability of a very unfortunate outcome.
And accidents are going to happen. And if accidents are going to happen, we as educators need to be better at telling people what can happen to them, and not just getting buried in the snow or pushed into a tree, but that they can have, it's going to affect them for a lifetime. And even if they're not the one pushed into the tree, they're the one who's helping rescue their friend. Or it was their friend on the mountain that got in trouble and they didn't go that day. Their mind is still having the same thoughts, and they're still they're feeling the same things that their friends did up on the mountain.
A lot of naiveness that happens, when you're in your education or you're in the backcountry or you're having these discussions with your friends. They're hard conversations to have, but we're not necessarily prepared for those things all the time. And I certainly didn't hear, anything about the word stress injury. I think stress injury I first heard 2 years ago.
My name's Laura McGladry. I'm a psychiatric and family nurse practitioner. My background is in emergency medicine, humanitarian aid, wilderness medicine, and I've been teaching wilderness medicine for a few decades. So I work at a trauma-focused clinic at the university, and I also work with a lot of austere teams in the national parks, high-angle teams, hoist teams. I'm a member of ski patrols and a search and rescue group in the Northwest. Stress injury is the nomenclature that military first used in operational stress first aid. So combat and operational stress first aid was developed in the middle 2000s to help support active military in theater folks who had overwhelming exposure in real time rather than waiting to get home and see a psychologist or something years later. We started using that nomenclature in stress injury. Really, I started using it as a clinician when I found that people were having to wait all the way till they got to this post-traumatic stress disorder goalpost with all the criteria to say that they weren't doing well. And to me as a clinician, it's like waiting till people are in the psychological ICU to start actually treating something when you really could have gotten to it in an outpatient setting and recognized it early and taken care of it. And so, candidly, in the populations that I work with, which law enforcement, dispatch, fire, EMS, rescue, there's a lot of stigma with post-traumatic stress disorder. And candidly, it's not even a disorder. It's your body's most adaptive stress injury or stress response. So we started using the terminology around stress injuries to more appropriately put it in the category of exposure type injuries that have early and late changing vital signs. And they're really common exposure injury types that can be mitigated when we recognize them. And so that's why we're using that terminology is truer than waiting all the way till you get a psychiatric disorder.
I think if I had known what it was, if people had at least introduced me to the concept beforehand, I may have identified it soon enough that it wasn't allowed to become full-blown PTSD. If you can identify these as stress injuries and treat them early on, oftentimes you can cut off their progression to becoming a full-blown illness.
We often, again, think about this injury type, if you've been psychologically impacted by something, unless it's PTSD, it's nothing. It's binary. You either have PTSD or you're fine, and that's actually not true at all. For many people, there are these early changing signs, and especially if the stress injury is associated with depletion before you actually see this exposure or whatever happens to you. And then one day I had something happened, or I saw something, or there was one accident too many, or a near miss. And then the day came, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I see this a lot in rescuers who've dedicated their entire careers to getting their certifications and getting out there and climbing that ladder. And then the day comes where it's like the tones go off, the page comes in, and they just say, I don't really want to do this today. And that's curiosity. Like, where did that go? So that loss of motivation, that loss of spark, for many, it just becomes an edginess. And for many, the gray starts to settle in, that things are just less fun than they used to be, and things are harder than they used to be. But that'd be an early change, and many people just assign that to personality and just keep pushing. So then as we see it progress up the sort of continuum of stress toward things like post-traumatic stress, then folks will start using numbing tools, right? Like they need to come home from an adventure and drink the 2 and 3 and 4 beers. Or what I see in a lot of alpinists is that the numbing tools are more climbing, more skiing, more risks. And I especially see this after folks have lost partners or have been involved in things that are very difficult. There's the version where people stop going out and don't want to do it anymore, sell their skis the next year and move on to mountain biking. But there's also the version where folks use that to stop feeling, or to feel something finally, and they'll push harder and go farther by themselves. They'll ski more and more like risky angles, and they'll just keep pushing. And the way that I think we can sometimes recognize that is if you try and stop them or say, hey, let's go ski something chill today, or let's go do something less, and they're like, get out of my way.
My name is Star Jameson, and I founded an organization, Survivors of Outdoor Adventures and Recovery. This is just a small little nonprofit providing education and resources. I had been involved I actually had 3 friends who were involved in avalanches, and I also was involved in a hit and run accident while riding my bike. And all of this happened in a 12-month period. And so in my research it was figure out what was going on with myself, dealing with my emotions, keeping myself involved in my community, which was backcountry skiing. I needed to figure out how to do that. I was looking for peer support. I was looking for any kind of therapy that would support me and what I was doing. And so I really wasn't finding anything online. I was searching and searching. I found resources for veterans that were comparable, that discussed PTSD. They talked about trauma, etc. But I really wasn't finding things specific to the outdoor industry and what would support us and really speak our language.
No, it's something that we're really, really bad at in the avalanche industry. There is a place for a discussion on mental health in avalanche education. One of the things that we do in the avalanche industry is we take everyone out and we teach them about avalanches. And we teach them about rescue. We teach everyone how to use their beacons.
So we tell people, get the gear, invest in the gear, get the knowledge, take the courses, get the forecast, get a picture for what's going on there, travel with good, skilled friends. But be careful, because the danger is always lurking.
We don't teach them what to do after they dig the person out. And that means basic first aid, CPR, and also how to deal with the stress and the trauma that's going to come with that. We're really bad at that. We're really bad about teaching people how to clean up the spilled milk but not how to replace the lost carton in the fridge, so to speak. You know, we should be teaching people first aid and mental health long before we teach them how to use their beacons.
Stress injuries don't just happen to professionals. We see them certainly in the volunteer rescue community. As a matter of fact, I almost worry about that community more because, for instance, when I was a brand new rescuer on a rural search and rescue, I was not prepared for some of the things that I saw. But there was no one there to sort of mentor me or say, hey, that was not normal. Or candidly, the way I hear it talked about really by the great leaders on the big climbing teams I work with is that was fucked up. That was hard. You know, that's not normal. That's not just go home and blow it off. And so we don't have a mechanism when people leave teams to follow them out the door and say, did you get hurt? Because they're not in the arc of a 20-year career or working toward a pension. So we see it in the unpaid professional rescuer, absolutely, and that's unpaid patrol or volunteer patrol or search and rescue. But we certainly also see it in climbing communities and ski mountaineering communities where people just love to do it. And over time, many of the people that I have grown up with, if you can say it that way, and shared time with, they will continue to say, I've lost half the people I started climbing with. Or here comes another one, or we just had another big run of losses. And again, the trouble with that, until more recently, is we had no way to really name that. Everybody knew, quote unquote, what you were getting yourself into, but we didn't have really any way to support and name what was happening to everyone, especially because everybody went back to their day jobs. And then their day jobs didn't feel good anymore, and the skiing didn't feel good, but there was really no name for it. That's why I think having a name and a place to gather, remember recognizing it early, and if you can call it mitigating or supporting it or getting back to yourself early is really where the key is. So to that end, I would say that it's fair warning now when we do avalanche education, when we're training new ski patrollers and new rescuers, to say that besides getting swept in an avalanche, besides falling off of someone, your ACL injury that we always talk about in ski patrol, or falling down the side of something when we're rigging, probably the most common injury that you're likely to face in your profession as a rescuer or in your long career as an enthusiastic alpinist is a stress injury. And if we start to put that on the radar, we'll start to watch for it. But we truly can't see what we're not looking for.
We now understand that it's incredibly common. So yeah, it would have been helpful to talk about it beforehand. I was never asked. Well, that's not true. I was asked once after coming back from a fatality, a double fatality. 2 people were killed in an avalanche. And I came back that evening after digging them up, and I was asked, are you okay? I said, yeah, sure. And that's the only time in my entire career that I was ever asked about my mental well-being after an event like that.
So prevention of stress injuries is an interesting way to think about that. I would think about it more of, stress injuries are very often depletion injuries. They don't just happen one day. As a matter of fact, many of the folks that I work with who are in the line of duty will, when we have, let's say, an aviation crash or an officer-involved shooting or a school shooting, I'm more interested in how that person was doing 2 days before the accident that they were responding to happened than the day of or the day after. Because as we look at that stress continuum, the farther that you get over toward the orange and the red, the less connection you have guaranteed, the more numbing tools you're using, the more scarcity, like, boy, this is too much, and more depletion. And so whatever hits you in that place will already feel like this is happening to me and I don't have enough for it.
What was the point at which you realized that you needed to get help and that you were going to go and get help?
Well, I was told I was going to go get help, by my friend and my boss. But I still wasn't ready to accept that I needed it. And I didn't accept that I needed it until I sat on my bed with a pistol in my hand and a suicide attempt was cut off by another friend of mine, and I was hospitalized for being a suicide risk. And that's when I finally was in a place where I was forced to sit down with physicians and social workers and people that specialize in this and learn the words and learn the language and go, okay, I guess I can buy into the fact that I need a little help. That's a hard way to learn, and I don't want anybody to ever have to learn that way. I got lucky. I got really, really, really lucky that the right person walked into my bedroom at the right time. And that's when I learned. So my whole goal here is to discuss this with people so that they know that language before they reach for that gun.
So prevention, what we often say in the work that I do is awareness then choice. First of all, be aware that when I get into those depletion states, I'm at much higher risk for traumatic stress injury. And then maybe the prevention might be, how can I get back toward more green, more toward resource, toward more connection, to be well slept and well fed and well climbed and resourced, like my batteries are charged enough that when something hard happens to me, I can appropriately see it for what it is and let things move through. So that's maybe what prevention might look like. And even, in the time of COVID, I was working in the Northwest with about 16 rescue teams. And I put it up on the slide. I said, what if I told you that in 3 months from now, something really hard was going to happen to your team? What could you do right now that would prepare you and sort of protect you from that injury being as bad as it might be? And so we talked about creating resiliency plans and really putting effort into building connection on the team and playing together and building those rituals in together. And then sure enough, in March, COVID hit, and Juneau Mountain Rescue reached out and they're like, we did what you said and we're doing great, because we went home and planned for something really hard to happen. So we feel like we've got this, we can do it. And so this understanding in the climbing and avalanche community, mountaineering community, hard things are going to happen. There are some teams that I work with, climbing teams, rescue teams, that I can literally say in the beginning of the summer, I'll see you in 20 dead bodies. And it's kind of a crass thing to say, but the idea is we're here because people are going to get hurt. We play in areas, we take high risks, we're going to lose each other. But is there something we could do to create more possibility of thriving, grieving, letting it move through, and not having that get stuck in our approach? And that, I think, is moving toward green and resourcing in that way.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Dale Atkins, and I'm a lavanologist. I study avalanches. And I've also been involved as a ski patroller and mountain rescuer for a whole lot of years. And as an avalanche professional, my emphasis has been on accidents and rescues. And I've investigated hundreds and hundreds of accidents. I've been on scores of rescues. And I've seen some really good things and I've seen some really sad things. There's a number of things that I've seen when we come in as rescuers. And as professional rescuers, we're not the first ones there. It takes a while for us to get there. And the person that's been injured or hurt, their friends are doing their best to take care of them. And then we come in and we take over. And certainly the person who's hurt, they're focused on their injuries and just trying to get through it. But then their friends that have worked so hard for maybe hours to keep their friend warm, to comfort them, they suddenly have nothing to do and they step off to the side. And in some ways, I'm almost more worried about them than the person who's injured in the long term. Because when I've gone back and then interviewed people to investigate accidents, the person who is injured, they knew there was a problem, they're focused on it, they want to heal, recover, and they know what they need to do to fix a knee or a shoulder. But it's their friends that are still trying to process all what happened and maybe did they contribute to it or not, and they're still struggling.
I now know the term stress injury to really label it, identify it, give it a name. I would say that I experienced a stress injury professionally before these 3 accidents happened. So that actually gave me an opportunity to experience different things professionally in my job. When I experienced a stress injury, I experienced depression at home. I uprooted my life. I left a relationship. I left a job. I left my home that was attached to all of that. And I really isolated myself. And I used exercise really as my outlet for, for dealing with the anxiety at work, the stress. And eventually, I was isolating myself a lot. I was spending a lot of time on my bike. I was, people offered to hang out, and I couldn't do it. So when the second round came, and it was about a year later, these 3 accidents that happened, I got hit by a car. I had already been through the first stress injury, and I was realizing it was coming back up again. And so I found myself wanting to isolate again, and realizing that didn't really work the first time. I was having signs of depression, and so realizing that staying connected to my community was such a crucial part of that, to avoid that sort of anxiety and depression that comes along with these accidents. Staying part of my community was also staying in the snow and doing what I really love to do. So in one of the accidents, I experienced PTSD, and it that also affected my job where I was working at the time. I was working next to a place where Flight for Life was flying out every single day. So I'd be at work with earbuds in, experiencing that. But for me, I really think that the awareness of what was going on with me at that time was crucial for me, and really wanting to learn more about what was going on with me mentally. I really took that head on and took these steps for myself, having already been through it. But with some of the communication that I had with friends who had gone through this before, they were seeing things like repetitive nightmares that were there after 14 years. They were still like on these emotional roller coasters that were happening, after 14 years of an accident. And so I really determined that wasn't something that I wanted to go through, and these people needed help. And, it was the next step. What was the next step is to deal with these stress injuries, and how could I help myself and then help other people.
Stress injuries weren't recognized, as we talked about before, for a long time. So what I saw in my own work, so I've been teaching wilderness medicine for 20 years plus, which means that there's people watching this video right now who said, hey, that was my woofer instructor in 2002. So hi, if that's you. And what we've been noticing in all these years in teaching wilderness medicine is that we are putting so much energy into that one injured person. right? We knew if someone had a tree strike or got swept and we pulled them out of an avalanche, we know how to warm them, we know how to package them, we know how to splint their pelvis, we know how to fly them out of there, and we have incredible resource for that. And that patient, if you focus in on the patient on scene, all the intention, maybe the helicopter flies in, you dig him out quickly, you stabilize him, you fly him out, and they go to a hospital, and the progression is then, right, the ER, then the ICU, then step down, and eventually someone, there's a meal train for them, and then maybe a GoFundMe, and then when they get back on the mountain the next year, there tends to be this big, maybe there's an article or a celebration, like, you're back, you made it. And we know how to do that so well. We know it in wilderness medicine, we know it in avalanche, we know it in rescue. But I had been noticing for about 10 years that there was this other person almost always who was just right off camera. There's somebody else who called it in. There was the person who was belaying. There was the person who made the decision to ski that route that day, or that the backcountry conditions were okay. And they're off to the side. They got the help here. And what do they look like? And that person could be anything we could all kind of think about, because we've all seen them. Some of them are pacing. Some of them are staring off into space. Some of them are up in our grill trying to help us with everything. But they are, what we almost always do is just, get them to the side, get them away, give them a graham cracker and a blanket, and we think that's treatment. Great. We treated them too. But here's the progression that I see over and over again. That person, maybe someone walks them down to the trailhead and sends them back in their car. They show up at the hospital and maybe someone says, hey, didn't you know you shouldn't have skied that today? I mean, did you read the backcountry report? I mean, where were you? And they wander away and they go back to work and they can't concentrate and they don't like being in their life anymore. And then I think the way it often goes is you break up with your person, whatever, you sell your skis, and maybe you make up a reason you're going to go back to graduate school and you drift away. The question is, were both people injured? Was the person off camera injured? And if so, what do we call that? What's the name of that injury? I mean, one of them got their life back and the other was permanently changed, forever changed. And so if we know that now to be called stress injury, then what do we do about it on scene? How do we mitigate it? So psychological first aid really came into full force in the mid-2000s. It was kind of a response to a global literature search that told us, hey, there are these 5 principles that help us. Anyone can do them. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a psychiatrist. You can be a forecaster. You could be a ski bum. You could be living on your mother's couch. It doesn't matter. You can do these because they were around themes in the literature of what helps support people in the moment to not go on and be injured in that way on scene. And the why of why that stops the injury from happening is actually pretty simple and maybe a little bit complex at the same time. For most of us, we have this cool built-in system that when we're faced with the stressor, our body responds. Right? So we're faced with, let's go back to skiing something where we know we're just a little bit pushing our edge and we think something starts to slide below us. Our body responds to it immediately before the brain even gets involved. And then let's say you ski a little bit more and you're good. Whew, that was close. You ski off, out of that for a minute and your body calms down and you're basically back to your physiologic baseline. You have this other cool mechanism that basically says, all clear. You're not going to die today. That wasn't a big deal. When stress injuries occur, it's really, in essence, a failure of that all clear signal. So something happens either to us or to someone we're watching or belaying or rescuing. And if you're a forecaster, I've seen this happen even if you made the forecast and someone else goes and skis it. Where we recognize that this is overwhelming, this is too much to respond to, this could be really bad. And when that happens, and especially if we feel isolated and especially if we feel like there's nothing we can do to stop it, the body adaptively, the part of your brain that triggers survival, clicks on, this is survival. And so in that moment, your body starts to respond, takes in all the images. Like, we better remember, if we ever make it out of this one, we're going to need to remember it for later. And so let's go back to that backcountry skiing scenario. The next time you get your skis out in the spring, right, you just grab you see the bindings, or when you try and head out, you know, for the next early season and the snow coming down, or the feeling of being out there, all those things that you felt in that moment before have been stored up for you, waiting, and those start to accumulate. And so stress injuries happen when there's a failure of that all clear signal. And your job in the moment when you don't fire off the all clear signal is basically to survive, not to live. So rather than spending all your time and energy thinking about what you're going to do next spring, or studying for your you know, AVI 2 course, or whatever you're applying yourself to, your energy goes to survive, 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 survive. And your body's physiology goes toward that, and it's exhausting. So the reason for psychological first aid, everything we do in psychological first aid on scene is meant to help us to show up and help remind that brain, or remind each other, all clear. We made it out of that. The ground's not moving anymore under your feet. Now that you're safe, now that you made it through that, the worst is over. And so we do that to counter those things that went into that switch being flipped. So there's 5 elements of psychological first aid. A lot of people say, oh, I already do those. And that's great if you do, but I bet you don't do all of them, because our culture doesn't do all of them. And if you do, gold star, do them with intention now, and remind each other to do them, right? Because when we're in that moment, we're probably pretty charged up too. So the 5 elements, the first one is establish a sense of safety. And again, this was reflected in the literature, that once you had a sense in your body that you made it through, you could physically release those hormones. All clear. So in those moments, the brain's not looking for complex conversation, it's coding for signs of survival. So when someone comes up to you on scene and says, now that you're safe, now that that's over, now that we made it through. One of the guys on YOSAR likes to say, oh, the worst is over. I mean, you could still be 1,000 feet up, but now the hard part's over. Let's do, right? Some of us feel that already when we see the helicopter coming, or the uniform. I was just working with the short haul team. They lowered someone eloquently in a screamer suit and flew away. And then this person who's just been flying through the air, this was a chance to, hey, now that you're on solid ground, you feel that ground beneath you. Now that that's over. And we really just keep reflecting it. And if we can, we want to try and to take away the reminders that keep reminding people it's happening over and over again. That might just be turning someone away from the slope that they're watching. For some of us in rescue, it's turning down radio communication so that they don't have to keep hearing the details over and over again, or pulling an ambulance between them and the rescue situation. Maybe it's taking the blood off of your shirt, or changing that, or some of those reminders. And sometimes it's just as simple as giving really true and somewhat the best facts that you can share. So even if you know, like, let's say that someone's been involved in an avalanche and they're critically injured, even saying, you know, I heard them screaming, which sounds terrible to us, is really, all of us are going to be coding for they're gone. And just to hear they're in stable condition, or that's them screaming. I love a good scream. That means they've got a good airway and they're hemodynamically enough stable to scream. And so just those facts, or like 3 people have been located, or they've been located and they're talking to the rescuer, or whatever that is that's true about this scene, right? That the helicopter is going to be here in 5 minutes. That all communicates safety, and you made it. The second one's calm. And calm is really about the first language that we ever learned to speak. And so in times when we're in survival brain, our survival brain actually learned a language that was earlier than me talking to you in English. And that is basically, like, even as we were little kids, the first language we ever learned was, how's mom doing? Is dad mad? Are they coming back? Do they like me? Am I safe? And so on a scene where you're trying to tell the body you made it, having someone come up on scene who can communicate to you with their real sense of calm. What we know what doesn't work is to show up on scene and say, calm down, and you're freaking out, But if you can come up on scene and take your own deep breath and have your own sort of moment, or maybe you can't because you're too panicked, but you could send someone else in that's calm, recognizing that they're going to look to you, they're going to look in your eyes, they're going to listen to your tone. How bad is this? Is this really bad? And when you come in with that metered sense of like, here's what we're going to do. Now that you're safe, we're going to package you, or we're going to wait here, we're going to get you warm. That communicates to them that you think they're going to make it. It's the most powerful thing we could probably do. So that's just a way to communicate. And sometimes we'll like actually in rescue, we'll feed back to them the fact that they are calming down. And then what a great sign that is. Hey, your vital signs have come down. Your heart rate was 120, now it's 80. That's a really good sign. Let's see if we can get it down to 60 together. So using those tools to just, the military actually makes people physically lay down and stop moving to calm them down. So that's that second one, calm. The third one, efficacy. That's kind of a big word. We often will use words like empowerment or engagement. And what that means, if you remember me saying that the kind of recipe for stress injury formation was a sense of overwhelm and then I can't get myself out of this, what we want to do is engage people in their own rescue. So we ask them questions. We let them know what the plan is and see if they have any feedback. In rescue and in backcountry work, I've seen some real heroics where people have actually splintered their own legs or asked people to help splint their own legs, or let's get the map out and we need your help to get out of here. And every little thing we do, I think probably one of the best examples in the emergency department for me, when a kiddo comes in whose mom has been injured or parent, you just keep giving them jobs. Can you help me find the ice machine? Can you draw me a picture of your house so I can show law enforcement where you live? Can you help me do the math to figure out exactly how old your mom is? Any job that's helping. So if we are supporting that bystander that we talked about in the beginning, giving them information and giving them a job that's helping that friend, actually gives them a sense that they're helping to get their friend or themselves out of it. So any kind of engagement that we can do is really powerful to fire off the all clear signal. That only stays on because the brain says, well, if it ever happens again, I can't get out of it. But if you know you can get out of it the next time. So this is the one that involves changing culture, because many of us on scene like to kind of show up and be like, whether we're just avid skiers or what, like, I'm the rescuer, you're the patient. And we really want to change that dynamic to be like, you're part of the team. How can we get each other out? Grief is another version of what we have done for millennia, right? It is a universal experience of loss, and we're built for it. We just forget that sometimes. And we wish for all the world that we had a way to get out of it or we could avoid it. And I think sometimes people call me to say, I don't want to feel this, or my team doesn't want to feel this. But really, grief is inherent to climbing and mountaineering communities because we do lose people that we love. And so grief is meant, as it always has been, to be supported in your tribe, to have a ritual around remembering, to play out for 100 people in 100 different ways, and to go on for a long time. Grief often feels like something's wrong, but it's just, it's adjusting to what the world has just given you. And it takes a long time. You have to reframe your world. But it is a natural process. And really, in my opinion, best done in community and connection. Talking about and allowing things to come up. As some days you're mad and you don't know why you're mad. Some days you just want to be by yourself. Some days you're laughing and you feel like you shouldn't be laughing. All that is the process of grief and integration. Both of those have a version where things get stuck. So grief can get stuck. I see grief get stuck the most when there's a question in someone's head, when someone says to me, if only I had just said something, if only I had gotten there sooner, if only we changed the route, if only. When I hear that, I think that grief might be getting stuck because you have no way to land that. And so there are times in grief that we really do need, if nothing else, a doula to walk us through, a mentor, a support. Maybe that's a clinician. Maybe that's someone else who knows what you're going through. But for most people, what we know in the literature is that you're going to come through these with the right ingredients. Like you want to grow a plant, you need sunlight and water and the right ingredients. And the same here. If you have the right ingredients of community and connection and resource, you're going to move through grief on your own. And both versions, grief and trauma, have this very cool place called post-traumatic growth, or I would say what comes after. And I'm not the biggest fan of the word resilience, because by definition, you're supposed to stretch and go back to your original form. And what I see in traumatic stress and coming through, the person who doesn't want to get their skis back on, but does it, works through it, finds their true love in skiing and alpinism or climbing again, but in a different way or in a different altogether way. And then there's more meaning. That's really where life takes a new shape and form. And that is what's waiting for us for so many of these stories. And we need to talk about that too in community. So I remember getting a call not long ago about an avalanche right in the heart of the shutdown and COVID. And my curiosity was, what grief rituals can we still do? Normally we get together, we have a fire. Normally we get together, we eat, we drop off food, we pick up each other's kids. If we can't do that, we cannot just throw up our hands. We have to create new rituals of checking in, of follow-up, of creativity, of, I don't know, food delivery and witnessing and the phone calls, and very tangible things for each other, even in this time, because the people who are losing during COVID are missing out on those important rituals that actually help us to get to integrate and become more, and things are getting stuck. So we have to work together as a community to figure out what these rituals look like right now, and don't just let them fall by the wayside, or we're gonna lose a lot of people that we love to climb with and play with, and who are creating and innovating things that we want them to, just because of this stuck grief process. So connection was reflected in the literature, first in the disaster literature, and all of the, really we see this time and again reflecting, in essence, the one thing outside of socioeconomic status that would predict how well people are gonna do when big things happen to them is, what is their level? What is your level of social connectedness at the time it happens? And so we try and leverage connection even on scene by using people's names. I work with some rescue groups who will put a piece of tape with someone's name on it so that they can over and over come on scene and say, hey, Jim, this is what I'm going to do. Hey, Jim, why? Because who else uses our names? Like the people who've always loved us. And it keeps bringing us back to like, now that you're safe, now that that's over. We try and leverage connection with, let's say it's a bystander, that they're not shoveled off and they don't get to see the person or support the person. I mean, best case scenario, we bundle them together, that their job is to keep them warm. And I've seen this on many rescues where even though it was tough, they end up laughing and kind of sharing with each other that they're gonna make it. And sometimes we'll actually leverage a phone call or a sat phone call to someone that they love far away, to just, again, when you talk to that person, it tells you like, I survived, I made it. So the last one is hope. And that one I think is a little bit more elusive sometimes. But the idea behind hope, and this was reflected in the literature, is that things can and will get better from this moment. So when things overwhelm us, we lose a sense that we have a future. And we have this profound sense that things will never be the same again. And so part of psychological first aid in that moment might just be reflecting real, true facts about what's going well for us and thinking toward future. Some people actually exchange hope for future. And so the way we might do that, let's say after an avalanche scenario or situation, is to leverage, like, the team that's coming trains together every 2 weeks. They have the team, the 3 people coming have a collective 150 years. Like if I'm in Yosemite, I'll say, hey, that's Philip Johnson. He's done more than 200 rescues in this valley. Like if you want anyone on scene today, it's them, or it's this team, or here's what we have going for us. We still have an hour to fly, or we've got these things going for us. It communicates to people that you believe that even though this was really tough, they have a really good shot at something good happening. Sharing predictive steps is also part of hope. It might be something like, So the helicopter is about to land, it's gonna get really loud for a while, and things are gonna fly everywhere, and then it's gonna get quiet, and then that's when we get you out of here. So that when that happens, they're not like, what is all this? We didn't know this could happen to us. And candidly, that's why we're having this whole conversation, because we know that hard things are gonna happen in the alpine communities and mountaineering communities and climbing communities. If you are just getting into the sport of climbing, if you're just getting into avalanche, ski mountaineering, if no one has told this to you already, I'm going to be the one to do it, you're going to lose people over time. None of us get out of that. None of us want it, but it is part of the order of things. Not taking risks that we shouldn't be taking or being reckless, but it's part of joining this community. The hope part is, how do we relate to that? How do we plan for it? How do we build social connections and rituals that help us move through that in a way where there's meaning, and that we can still be those thriving skiers and climbers when we're 50 and 60 and 70. We're still contributing. We're the elders of that community. Even if you're just starting right now, I think it starts with fair warning that you'll see this, that you're not going to escape this, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot that you can do to build your capacity to thrive in the midst of it.
I participated in a treatment called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which was incredibly helpful. And whether it was through EMDR or just talking to people, or maybe just finally getting a little sleep, I realized it's not my fault. And those were the big words for me. You know, accidents happen. People go to the mountains and they fall down. Sometimes people go to the mountains and they die. And that's the reality of this show. People die. But it's not your fault. It's not my fault. You respond to those accidents, whether it's your friend buried in an avalanche on a ski tour or a professional rescuer going out to help somebody. You're just doing the best you can with a really bad situation. And as long as you can say, hey, I did the best I can, you can go to bed that night. You can sleep.
Something we see with avalanche accidents is that people's skill level, their sport level, whether skier, snowmobiler, but their skill level is way up high. But their knowledge is down real low. So there's this big gap between the skills and the knowledge. And as educators, what we try to do is help narrow that gap and bring them together so people can make better decisions. And it's not just about the terrain, weather, and snowpack, but it's the human factors. And it's the human factors that go into making good decisions or poor decisions, so we can recognize those. But it's also living with the consequences of what happens afterwards. And hopefully those consequences are wonderful things that happen. But with avalanches, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And by being able to talk now about stress injuries and telling people about them, they'll be better prepared when something goes wrong. And as a rescuer, it's a nice thing for me to know that we can help people, not just get off the mountain, but down the road and get back to their sport.